Here is another CEO You Should Know on iHeartRadio.
Welcome to CEOs You Should Know this morning. I'm Dave Wilson. It's your chance to get to know CEOs in our community, and we have another great guest for you this morning. Lou Schweckheimer, the CEO and owner of the new Wichita baseball team, is with us. Lou, thanks for coming in this morning.
Thanks for having us, Dave.
Let's get to know you a little bit. Tell us your story. Where were you born? Where are you from?
I was born just north of Boston in Newburyport, Massachusetts. Way too many years ago, by the way. And my baseball journey to Wichita basically started as a 19-year-old intern. So,
wow.
We all played baseball growing up, and I thought for a while that I might have a shot to continue to play as I got older, and we all want to play in the big leagues. But thankfully, some of my coaches and competitors thought otherwise, and when I went to UMass Amherst, really wanted to focus on the business side.
Okay.
And continued to play baseball and enjoyed it and played very competitively, but started to focus at that point, and part of the program at UMass was to do an executive internship.
Okay.
Didn't know a soul. Was living in an athletic dorm at UMass, and I just decided one day to pick up the phone and call Fenway Park and hope that somebody would answer the phone and give me 5 minutes.
Right.
And in Boston lore, there's a receptionist named Helen Robinson, and she was there when Ted Williams played, when Johnny Pesky and Dominic DiMaggio played. She saw the Yaz era through Jim Rice and Fred Lynn. She had been there for 60 years.
Wow.
And I started blabbering on about how I wanted to change the game, and she stopped me in mid-sentence and said, "Hold on, Sonny. Let me get you somebody that'll listen to you." And so, thankfully, a guy named Dick Bresciani, who was also a UMass guy years before me, started to listen to my story. And I just explained to him that I really wanted to learn how to get into the world of baseball because I didn't know a soul. And I had no connections in the game. And so from that phone call, he said, "Well, why don't you take a ride in and see me sometime?" I said, "What are you doing tomorrow?" He said, "Well, why don't you come on and see me tomorrow?" And I had an old beat-up Volkswagen, and I could see the Mass Pike between the yellow lines from the hole in the floor of my Volkswagen. It was white with a red stripe, and it was like a Starsky and Hutch stripe. From
Nice.
For those that are not old enough, it's a red stripe on the car, and I called it the White Tornado because it went about 40 miles an hour. And so I drove to Fenway Park, and I had borrowed a sport coat from my roommate and a tie from the guy down the hall and a pair of shoes, and I looked like one of those characters from like an old Oliver Twist, like I was a little ragamuffin guy walking into Fenway. And, thankfully the good grace of people wanting to pay it forward, somebody had given Dick Bresciani an opportunity, and he just felt that everybody who calls should get a minute.
Right.
And so we talked for about 15 minutes, which was my allotted time. And he said, why don't we take a little walk? That little walk, 5 hours later, ended with me getting a full-time opportunity to work for the Boston Red Sox.
That's amazing.
So that's how it all started right there at Fenway Park.
You just picked up, called Fenway Park, drove in the Tornado.
Yeah, and so that internship saw me kind of get my feet wet at Fenway Park, and it was a great year for me because it was 1978, and that was the year the Red Sox and Yankees, and if you're from Boston, you remember the name Bucky Dent.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Well, we had a name to Bucky when we, but that was a great year, and I got to work with the players on the field and understand what their concerns were, but also start to understand the business of baseball. And when that internship ended, I went back to school and I called Dick Bresciani, and said, "Hey, I want to learn the business now. How do I do that?" He said, "Well, there's a AAA club in Pawtucket, Rhode Island." I didn't know where it was. And so I went back to my wardrobe ensemble and went to Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and I secured an internship there. And the ballpark was a lot like Lawrence Dumont Stadium.
Okay.
Built by FDR in that whole Works Project Administration during World War II. And it was falling down. It was there that I met Annie, and we started our baseball journey back in the day. And the thing about McCoy Stadium was that as much as it was falling down, I looked at it and I fell in love with the idea that, boy, if this place got a little TLC,
Right.
it'd be magic. The grass looked like one of those old cowboy westerns with just clumps of tumbleweed, and there were holes punched in the outfield wall and concrete was falling. And so that started the journey. And I went from intern, I didn't get paid for 2 years, graduated from UMass with my degree, and then was offered a job in the PR department.
Okay.
And then from there in 5 years had gone from PR director to general manager. And then George Steinbrenner in 1985 had offered me my first big league job.
Wow.
The Evil Empire, the New York Yankees. And I turned it down because we hadn't fixed up McCoy yet.
Okay.
And I really wanted to make that part of the legacy. And the following year, the Red Sox offered me a dream job in 1986. And that was the year the Red Sox went to the World Series.
Played the Mets.
Yeah. And I sat in Shea Stadium with the loudest roar I've ever heard in my life when the ball went down the first base line.
Bill Buckner.
Billy Buck. And I had worked that World Series for the Red Sox in the dugout.
Wow.
With guys that we grew up with, Roger Clemens and Wade Boggs and Marty Barrett and Rich Gedman and Bruce Hurst and Bobby Ojeda on both sides of the field. And that was the moment where I looked around and said, I love what I do. Mm-hmm. And that's working in the player development department where guys have this dream to get from where I was as a kid to the World Series. And I felt that what we were doing in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, was helping fulfill those dreams because we had transformed the ballpark. And we had created this energy and this positive vibe and this culture of ascending up the food chain from Pawtucket to the big leagues. And I didn't want to leave that. So when I got my next job offer with the Red Sox, I turned that down. And it was then that the owners in Pawtucket said, sign this. And Andy and I know the owner, Ben Mondor, was a legendary figure, self-made guy. And I said, well, what is it? He said, just shut up and sign it. So I looked and and it was ownership in the team.
Wow.
For loyalty. And I never forgot it. Yeah, so that's how my journey started. And so then our run in Pawtucket ran for almost 40 years.
Is that right?
Yeah.
40 years.
Yeah, so we were able to transform the franchise. We led the nation in attendance. And during our tenure, 20 million people came through the turnstiles to watch the games.
Wow. And I think I read over like 700 players made it to the majors.
So while I was GM, 752 players had gone from Pawtucket to Major League Baseball. And it's funny because some may have gone for a day and got their cup of coffee, and others, like Wade, is in the Hall of Fame. And I can remember throwing batting practice to Wade on Sunday afternoons with Billy Broadbent, our clubhouse guy.
Is that right?
Who's now the video coordinator for the Boston Red Sox because Boggsy didn't want to go home. He wanted to keep hitting. And to see a guy like that go from draftee to being overlooked in the expansion draft and overlooked in the Rule 5 draft because everybody thought he was too slow, had no range, had a weak arm, was a singles hitter, had no power. One scout read a report and said his range is between his ankles. I mean, that's harsh.
Yeah, that is
And
harsh.
to watch him work every day to commit to his craft, the only reason he got to the big leagues was because the Red Sox third baseman got hurt. Okay. And I got a call from Lou Gorman and said, hey, get Boggs ready. We're not going to use him. We're going to trade for a third baseman.
Wow.
And the trade fell through, and Boggs went up to play and went 3 for 5. And then he went 3 for 5 again. And then he went 4 for 6. And the next thing you know, he's hitting 388 in the big leagues. They invite him to spring training, and they're getting ready to send him back to us. Third baseman gets hurt. all I can tell you is that guy that was never supposed to make it had 6 years in a row of 200 hits, 100 walks, first time in baseball history. He's now in the Hall of Fame.
One of the greatest hitters of all time.
Yeah.
Wade Boggs. Amazing story.
Yeah.
You're listening to CEOs You Should Know this morning. Our guest is Lou Schweckheimer, the owner and CEO of the new Wichita baseball team coming here. Let's go back for a few minutes, Lou. How did you fall in love with baseball?
So I grew up in a little town in Newburyport, Mass., and we lived in a little project where a lot of kids were out every morning at sunup, and we would go out and play. No umpires, no equipment, no uniforms, and we would play until you couldn't see the ball anymore. And that's where it started. And then, again, you grow up playing Little League ball, you play Pony League ball and AAU travel ball, and then you play in high school and college and all of that. But I just fell in love with the game, and I can remember the first time getting an opportunity to go to Fenway Park as a 12-year-old. And I remember walking up the ramp at Fenway and coming out, and there was the seating ball, and I looked up, and there was the green monster. And I could almost feel like you could touch it.
Right.
And my knees buckled. And I saw the white, bright Red Sox uniform with Red Sox and the green monster and the green grass, and I could smell popcorn, and the vendors were coming by with hot dogs. And at Fenway, they used that spicy brown Gouldens mustard. I can't have a hot dog today without spicy brown Gouldens mustard. And so that's where the love affair really began. And that's when I realized that instinctively as a young kid, both my parents worked so hard. I can just remember that if you're going to really be successful, you got to love what you do. And I think as a 12-year-old, I realized that I'm going to go play in the big leagues. And then as I got older and smarter, I realized that, no, you're not. So how do you figure out how to follow your passion and how do you follow your dream to do what you love? And thankfully, through the good graces of a mentor like Dick Bresciani, he gave a kid a chance.
Right.
And then an owner like Ben Mondor, who was a self-made guy, said, all right, he might not be the smartest guy in the room, and he'll never be the brightest guy in any of our meetings, but he's the first one in, and he's the last one out. And I always thought that heart and work ethic was the great equalizer. And that's the same on a baseball field. I can tell you 1,000 guys that should have had 20-year big league careers that didn't work hard enough. And guys like Marty Barrett, who's 5'8", Dustin Pedroia, who's 5'6", who have no business being in the big leagues for 10 years if you look at measurable stats and you look at power rankings and speed and agility and all those things. What they didn't measure with those two guys was the size of their heart.
Right.
And there's a 5'6" second baseman for the Boston Red Sox who was the Rookie of the Year, who then was the MVP, who's got 3 World Series rings, who you would look at in the mall going, somebody get this kid a pair of sneakers and a hoodie, never knowing he's a big league ball player.
Right.
And that's what's magic about our game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a great thing.
Let's fast forward to today. So now you're helping to bring minor league baseball back to Wichita. How did this come about?
So I sold my ownership stake in Pawtucket in 2015.
Okay.
And I really wanted to put together a group to do what we did in Pawtucket because we had done the journey and Ben had passed away. And I had said to Ben years ago that I had created this vision for returning baseball to Havana, Cuba. And it started when I was at the Kennedy School. I had done a program at Harvard just because I was interested in international relations. And I had a chance to go to Moscow with MLB in the first ever goodwill tour of the Soviet Union. And I saw kind of the Soviet Union through the prism of a kid that used to hide under my desk, and
right.
They were going to bomb us and we were going to bomb them in the Cold War. And I realized that everybody I talked to in Moscow was thrilled that I was there. I had an Eddie Bauer jacket on and a pair of Levi's. And every time I walked through Red Square, kids would be saying, Eddie Bauer, come over here, you know? And I remember trading my Eddie Bauer jacket and my Nikes for like a Soviet baseball jersey.
Okay.
And those nesting dolls, the Matryoshka dolls that have like, and I still have like 5 minutes after I traded for a Russian military watch, it stopped working and it never worked since. But I still have it, you know? So I really fell in love with that, and we put together a group to buy, as it was like an investment vehicle. Mm-hmm. And the investment vehicle was simply going to be, let's buy clubs that we view are underperforming. And then let's create an environment where maybe we can turn those clubs into a successful operating business. And the first club we bought was Cal Ripken's club in the Florida State League that had slowly, gradually declined and was not performing to the level it should. And we immediately set out to turn that around. And at about the same time, we realized that the New Orleans club in AAA was for sale. A group of big league players led by Craig Biggio, Roger Clemens, Nolan Ryan, Jeff Bagwell, was going to buy the club and move it to the Woodlands, Texas. And we watched that with great interest because that was kind of setting the bar on franchise valuations. So they paid a pretty significant amount of money for the club, and then the deal to Texas fell apart.
Okay.
So we quietly went to New Orleans to try to explore if we could buy the club. And we bought the controlling interest of the club, but we knew that the stadium in New Orleans after Katrina had never been taken care of. So we spent $1.5 million of our own money just to restore the concession stands. There were no POS systems. You could even buy a hot dog.
Really?
Or take a credit card. So we went to ground zero and started to restore the franchise, knowing that it was probably going to be better suited for a lower classification. Mm-hmm. But we didn't want to hurt the community. And at the time we were evaluating just what it's going to take to make Major League Baseball allow us to stay, Wichita called.
Oh, okay.
And so I had never been to Wichita. Sorry to say.
That's all right. We're glad you're here now.
And so I said, you know what? We'll come take a look. And I can make a long story short. And the first time I set foot in Wichita, I fell in love with the people, with the environment, with the town. I'd never been to a more welcoming place in the world. And I said to several members of our group, I need you to just go to Wichita. Don't even talk to each other. And tell me if I'm crazy.
Okay.
And they all came back and said the same thing. It's a great city.
Yep.
And that's the genesis of how we got here today.
Wow. Great story. CEOs you should know, you're listening this morning. We're talking with Lou Schweckheimer, the CEO and owner of the new Wichita baseball team. So let's talk about the development. Of course, there's going to be a new stadium, and just north of that, there's going to be a development as well. What's going to go there?
Well, I can tell you this. So the process started when we got the approval to relocate. We quietly sat down with the city and said, in order for this to work, we had to overcome some obstacles with baseball because as much as we love Wichita, the Wranglers came and left, the Arrows came and left, the NBC had kind of quietly started to lose some cachet in the global environment of tournaments, and there was a concern about Wichita baseball. Mm-hmm. And so after meeting with the mayor, and I have to say, Mayor Longwell is one of the visionaries that made all this come together. And he was adamant that if we could find a way to build a new stadium, the past is irrelevant. And we agreed with him.
Right.
And so we sat down, and last night was a great night for all of us because we had negotiated 3 deals, concurrent and on parallel tracks, that really, number one, is the stadium construction agreement. Major League Baseball is going to require these things in order for you to relocate. And the city delivered on the stadium construction. And so all of us in Wichita are going to be proud of what you see come out of the ground. It is going to be breathtakingly beautiful. It's going to be, and I said it the first time I saw the designs come together, This stadium stands poised it's going to be an iconic stadium, and it stands poised to take its place among some of the great ballparks in America.
Wow.
And so the second agreement was just, let's ensure we're going to be there for the long haul. So we signed a 30-year agreement to run and manage the stadium. And then the last agreement signed this morning was the private development, which all the team really considered was, if you're tearing up Lawrence Dumont Stadium and there's an opportunity for us to take what was the parking lot and the land adjacent to the stadium, then let us have the first stab at developing it so it's in concert with the facility, that it makes sense for the development, that it works with the Layham Group's development north of the stadium. So it's one master plan that we can do concerts, festivals, sleepovers for kids, movie nights, put a skating rink out there, and it really becomes a four-season destination. So the city council, in their due diligence and hard work, crafted 3 very good deals for the city, good deals for the team. It's a classic win-win, and I'm proud to say now we're in the position to secure successful AAA baseball for the next generation.
Wow.
Yeah, we're excited about it.
Yeah, that's outstanding. Listen to CEOs You Should Know this morning. Our guest is Lou Schweikheimer, Chairman and CEO of Wichita Baseball 2020, and you're still looking for a name.
We are looking for a name, and there's a lot of talented people in this iHeart Radio studio, and we're looking for a little help.
All right. Can people email names somewhere?
So we have Annie Life with us here, and so Annie is coordinating all the activities, and her email address. Come up to the microphone, Annie, and give us your email address for the world to know. This is where you're going to be able to get your name submitted and know that it's going to be considered seriously.
You can send your suggestions to alife@wichitabaseball2020.com.
All right, there
She's
you go.
a hard grader, too, so make sure it's a good name with a good reason for doing it.
Right. Lou, let's go back. I know you kind of briefly talked about this. Tell us about your Caribbean Educational and Baseball Foundation that you helped create.
That was a vision that started really from the Kennedy School at Harvard. I had gone, and my thesis at Harvard was to really bring professional baseball back to Havana, Cuba. And that started at a round table at the Royce Hotel in Tampa. And George Steinbrenner was hosting a bunch of baseball executives from the International League. And I was the new kid on the block. I was young, and all the old guard were talking about playing in Havana back in the day.
Okay.
And they were telling stories about Castro coming down from the Sierra Maestra Mountains. And Carl Yastrzemski, who I got to know and Annie got to know when we were with the Red Sox, was the second baseman for the Minneapolis Millers.
Really?
Who lost in Game 7 in the bottom of the 9th inning when Havana pinch hit a pitcher with another pitcher who hit a walk-off to win the World Series.
Pitchers can't hit.
Well, this one did. And so I was fascinated, and Steinbrenner said to me, he goes, "You know something, kid? Someday somebody's going to figure out how to bring baseball back to Cuba, and they're going to change the game forever." And I kind of kept it in the back of my mind for all those years.
Right.
So now when I got to Harvard, I said, that's a great thesis. I'll work on the business model to make it happen. And my thesis advisor was a wise old guy, and he said, "Not going to do it. You're too young. Get off your butt, make it happen, and we'll make it a case study." And 2 weeks later, I realized that I was in Havana, Cuba, delivering the keynote address at a symposium at a Harvard MIT-sponsored urban planning initiative that my advisor was the chairman of. And I had just a week to prepare, so I said, I'm going to have fun. So I put together a video, and in the video I had the theme to Bonanza playing and a big campfire roaring. And so there's all these urban planners from around the globe, and the Cuban ministers are walking out because the Yankee is playing Bonanza,
Oh, yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, this isn't going well. But what happened was the camera panned back from that campfire, and the music went to take me out to the ball game, and it was 1,000 tents on the outfield grass at McCoy Stadium for our Boy Scout sleepover.
Oh, okay.
And the theme to my presentation was, your baseball stadium is the front porch to your community. But more importantly, for you at this time in Havana, Cuba, it's an economic development engine. And the next thing I knew, a black sedan pulled up with a little Cuban flag on either side, a bodyguard, and a translator, and I was off to meet with the senior minister of sports in Havana, Cuba.
Wow.
And he said to me, he's wagging his finger at me, he goes, you need to understand, in perfect English. And he's one of those guys you don't really like because he's 6'4", he's a PhD, Hollywood handsome, great athlete, perfect hair, one of those guys, spoke 5 languages, and then he got up in perfect English and he said, you need to understand 3 things while you're here. Number 1, we Cubans believe in the revolution. Number 2, we believe in Fidel, because without Fidel, there is no revolution. And then he got up, he started pointing his finger in my chest. He goes, but most importantly for you, young man, we believe in baseball.
Wow.
All life in Cuba flows through baseball. I got up, I gave him a hug, and I said, we're going to get along just fine.
That's outstanding.
And that's how it all started.
Wow.
Yeah.
And now there's so many great major league players from Cuba.
You could field an all-star team.
Yeah.
Annie just got back. So Annie's been in Cuba with our organization, our charitable foundation. We've delivered over 3 tons of equipment, over $1 million of equipment to Cuba. We're trying to restore baseball fields. And it started in Cuba. We've branched out, and Annie and Tommy Goodman just got back from Jamaica. One of our great Red Sox players, Justin Masterson, was involved in that trip. And they delivered a ton of equipment. Why don't you come to this microphone and tell them a little bit about that trip?
You're back up, Annie.
And talk a little bit about what we're trying to accomplish on the ground.
Well, our goal is basically just to build bridges through baseball. Everybody has the passion for baseball, and we're using that as the common denominator. And so we raise money through our charitable events. We get donations from schools, from the private sector, from sports. And interestingly enough, in Jamaica, you all know they play cricket.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought, what are we going to face here? We don't know. But we were invited to come down. We partnered with BMR, who is Richard Branson, the renewable energy, the wind energy there. And we, with Justin Masterson, and we delivered baseball clinics for over 300 kids.
Wow.
And they absolutely loved it. We met with the Minister of Sports there in sports. They've welcomed us back. And the whole idea is just to, like I said, build bridges through the passion of baseball.
That's amazing. The love of baseball.
And I can tell you this, and Annie's too modest. Justin was a great player, but Annie's the first woman in the history of schoolboy girl sports in Pennsylvania to make her varsity baseball team.
Is that right?
Boys team. Before Title IX.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So if we do an iHeart Radio Wichita 2020 softball game,
Yeah.
you don't want to mess with her. She'll take you out in a double play at second base as soon as look at you.
I love it, Annie. Well, we just have a few minutes left, Lou. What would you say to someone listening today, a young person that wants to do what you do, wants to get into baseball? What would you say to them as far as how to get started?
Well, I would say this. Number one, never listen to people who say it can't be done. And believe in your dream and follow your dream with every ounce of heart and soul that you have. Because I can't tell you how many part-time jobs I had in high school and college where I would share my dream. I'm going to go work in the big leagues. And they would laugh, say it's impossible to get there. And I would encourage people to follow their passion, find something that they love. And if it's baseball, start writing letters. Pick up the phone and call people. Knock on doors. I think we all have a moral obligation in the game. Somebody gave us a start. And if you never forget that and you respect the journey, you have a moral obligation to help those coming behind you to help their dreams come true. And we get emails, we get letters, we get resumes, and we make it a point to answer every single one of them. And so tonight, or this morning, as you hear this, if you're a college kid or a high school kid, you're going to Wichita State or wherever and you have a dream, stop by the construction trailer. Let us walk you around. Maybe we can find a way to connect you with one of our team members on an internship or at least a part-time summer job. I mean, that's a great way to start. Look at the game through working in a concession stand or on the ground crew or in the sales office and learn the business. Mm-hmm. You're not going to get paid a lot to start. I worked for 3 years each year for free. But it was worth it, and I wouldn't trade a second of it because it gave me the knowledge. You know, internships are great. They'll tell you one of two things. This is what I want to do the rest of my life, or what the heck was I thinking, you know? And so either way, it's valuable, right?
Right, exactly.
So my advice is always chase your dreams, never let them go, never quit. Persistence pays off. Just keep grinding until you're where you want to be. That's the great equalizer.
Well, Lou and Annie, it's been a pleasure from Wichita Baseball 2020. Thanks for coming in today.
Thanks for having us, Dave. We appreciate it.
That's another CEO You Should Know. Thanks for being a part of our community, and thank you for listening to this iHeart Wichita radio station.